Jefferson Robbins with NCWLIFE. On October 1st, this station became part of the corporate family of the Wenatchee World newspaper. Our station was acquired by Wick Communications, which is the ownership group that took ownership of the Wenatchee World in 2018. To talk about that enterprise and the project of pushing journalism into the future, we're joined by Wick Communications CEO, Francis Wick. Francis, thanks a lot for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us more about Wick Communications. What's its origins and how has it gotten to where it is now?
Yeah. So our family company is just on the verge of celebrating its 100th year of existence. It was founded in a small town in Ohio, Niles, Ohio, by my grandfather and my great-uncle Jim, shortly before the Great Depression. And over time, newspapering and journalism really became the heart blood of our family and our family company, expanding through small communities across the country, and eventually the family moving to Arizona, where we're headquartered today. We had the great opportunity to take over the Wenatchee World from the Rufus Woods family. And that has been an incredible opportunity that we've taken very seriously to serve the Wenatchee Valley. And it's a beautiful business to be associated with, the calling of local journalism and what that means. However, the business itself is extremely challenged across this country. And it's something that I have tried to bring a lot of awareness to through messaging and through different avenues of legislation, so that people can understand what happens when local journalism goes away.
It's obviously important to you and to the company. Wick Communications now owns, I think, about 18 newspapers in different markets.
Yeah.
Not all of them large, not all of them small, a lot of them in medium-sized markets. Mm-hmm. What made it make sense when you considered NCWLIFE? What makes a newspaper company want to say, I want to get into the TV and video business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, first of all, understanding that most, if not all, legacy media has been under disruption since about 2006, right? So we have seen in the newspaper industry, since the Great Recession, a decline in our top line revenue of about 8% a year. So you compound that, to give you an example, our industry in general was about a $60 billion industry from an advertising standpoint. Today, the industry is about $10 billion. So that compression has had a huge effect on how we can structure our organizations, where we have our resources, and we have to, at the same time, operate a sensible business that performs for the community, but we also have a responsibility to try to figure out, how do we transition? How do we look at where things are moving? And as you know, everyone we look at, I mean, most people now access a lot of their information digitally. And they may do it through a video format, they may do it from an audio format or a text-based format. And we get the majority of our consumption of our content today from the Wenatchee World is through digital channels, hands down. It's a lot harder to make money in a digital environment. So as we look at the Wenatchee Valley and what it means to Wick Communications and how we can best serve it, we see very much a future where it's not necessarily about the medium that we're distributing on. It's not necessarily about the channel that we're distributing, it's the mediums, and make sure that they all come together. So whether it's text, video, audio, and the work that you all do here at NCWLIFE is incredible. You fill a channel that we don't currently serve, right? The approach that the newsroom takes is a little bit different than what the Wenatchee World has, and there are a lot of complementary efforts that should be assumed in that aspect. And then as we look at it, we think that one of the growth segments, the data shows, it's not we think, the data shows that one of the growth segments for consumption of news and local advertising is video. And so the capabilities that NCWLIFE brings the Wenatchee Valley and the Wenatchee World make complete sense on where we want to ultimately build an organization to better serve the Valley in the future.
So as video and as print all sort of converge in the digital space, you want to see those work as one?
I think we want to see them function together, work together in a way that complement each other, because each medium has a different value in how it tells a story. And there are some cases like we may duplicate efforts, and there may be other cases where we don't necessarily need to duplicate efforts. But at the end result, we want to make sure that we're providing enough breadth and reason of the journalism that we're providing, that the community is well equipped and informed and feeling good about where they can go and get their information.
Well, you talked, Francis, about some of the challenges facing local journalism and some of the declines that it's seen, but what kind of things are giving you, at this moment, optimism about the future of local journalism? What are you seeing on the horizon that makes you think, you know, this has got room to grow and can still serve a community?
That's a great question. I would say what gives me optimism is talking to people who want to come into journalism. Like what that mission is to them. Why they want to help inform a community. I think the business model in itself is in a really tough spot. And we're going through a transformational period of time where we need to double down and triple down on what that new model feels like. And it's going to require some innovative approaches. It's going to require a lot of change. And change is so innately uncomfortable for people, Jefferson. Like, I can't stress this enough. Like, it doesn't matter what organization I'm in, if it's a newspaper or any other like peer business that I'm talking to, when you talk about change in itself is so hard for people to handle. And that's what we have to do. We have to be willing and open to change and understand that some of the things that we've done in the past that were successful no longer work. And some of the things that we're going to try to do to be successful may not work either. But we have to try it. We have to be open to it. And so, in many ways, this is such a unique and exciting moment in time because we get to try something different, right? There's no right way because the path hasn't really been created yet. There are ways for us to consider how we can do this, that it's sensible and can ultimately be financially successful. And that's the key. Every business has to be financially successful. And that has to do with the relationships that we have in a small town. And the reason why we're very excited about what this can be for NCWLIFE and Wenatchee World is that Wenatchee Valley is a region that wants to support local. So when we go to business owners and we say, look, we can provide these same advertising services that you might be working with somebody in Seattle or Spokane or perhaps in Silicon Valley, we can do the same thing here. Oftentimes they'll step back and say, okay, you know what? We want to support our neighbors. We're willing to leave those dollars here and work with people that we can pick up the phone, go grab coffee with, and talk it through. And that's a big deal. So I am optimistic. I will tell you, the short term is going to continue to be very challenging. And I also think that big tech has a role in all of this, right? Like we're playing in a space that is largely controlled by few organizations that are based in Silicon Valley. And I think we tend to forget that because we're so consumed with what's right in front of us, not realizing just how the infrastructure of the digital environment is controlled today.
You talked a little bit about the financial aspects of local journalism and how there's challenges there. One of the things that I think has been proposed and which you've looked at is different funding options for local journalism. Refundable tax credits maybe to preserve jobs in local newsrooms. And there's been a couple of initiatives that you've taken to Congress and to legislatures. Can you explain a little bit about those?
Yeah. So in 2020, during the throes of the pandemic, our company is small. We don't have a lot of resources, but our balance sheet was really attractive. We didn't have any debt. And I was I believed that the first few days of the pandemic that we were going to see a cash halt within the economy. So people would stop paying bills because they had no money coming in. And that would have been cataclysmic, right? And as I sat there, I thought to myself, okay, I'm running a family company that is in its third generation. We have fourth generation that's starting to get involved. And you have hundreds of families that rely on you because of the jobs that they serve. The communities are looking to you to perform journalism to help educate them on what's going on with testing, what exactly is COVID-19. It was a big deal, and I became very concerned, like, this may not work. Like, how do we do this? And I sat down and I had my Jerry Maguire moment. That's what it was. I was in my house and I kind of freaked out, and I jammed out a white paper. And the original white paper had 4 points in it. And it was really to circulate with lawmakers for people to understand, like, hey, your local news institutions are in incredible peril right now. And we need support and understanding of what we do more so than we ever have. We don't want to be in your pocket, but we need the support to be able to transform our business into the business it's going to become. And my biggest fear is that as the business model continues to consolidate, you only have so many resources you can pull from, right? And oftentimes there's 5 buckets, and each one of those buckets gets impacted. And so what we tried to do, at least I tried to put forth some creative applications to incentivize newsroom jobs. So refundable tax credits were a way to help support keeping journalists employed while also ensuring that if your news organization didn't make any taxable income, that they would still receive the benefit. And it's hard to be honest about this, but about 50% or more of newspapers today don't have taxable income. That doesn't mean that they're not cash flow positive. It just means that they have no taxable income. And that's a big concern. And so we're now currently seeing about 2.5 newspapers close a week throughout this country. It's been accelerating. There is research that has been conducted that shows that when a newspaper goes away, or your local news organization, right? Because there's this belief that from the ashes, a phoenix will grow. And that hasn't always been the case. And especially in small towns, like, this is really dangerous. You have less voter turnout when your local news organization goes away. You have less people run for office. You have less support and advocacy from your lawmakers on the Hill if they're not getting acknowledgement for it. And the list goes on and on. And so this is, in my estimation, one of the most important things that we can try to address and bring awareness around so that we can formulate some type of short-term, midterm strategy to help keep newsrooms, and what I like to say, professional journalism. And maybe in a couple seconds we can touch base on that, because this is a big deal for me, is what we qualify professional journalism.
Let's talk about the mechanisms behind the tax credits that are proposed. There were 2 pieces of legislation: the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, that's about 3 years ago now, and the Community News and Small Business Support Act, which is in the current Congress.
Yeah.
What's the mechanism? What kind of system do they seek to set up? How does the money flow?
Good question. So the first piece of legislation that we introduced was the Local Journalism Sustainability Act. It had 3 initial components, and in fact was supported. It was a bipartisan piece of legislation that was supported by our representative here, Dan Newhouse, and the representative down in Southern Arizona, where we're headquartered, Ann Kirkpatrick. And I was very proud of that, because when it comes to local news, the fact of the matter is it should not be partisan. It shouldn't matter if you have a D or an R. What should matter is, do you have qualified people out there reporting on stories that help bring utility and value to the people of that community? And can you get a hold of that organization if there's a problem? And so we made that introduction of legislation. I went in very aspirational. Very naive as to what DC was about, and I thought for sure we would see a groundswell of support. And like everything in DC, over time everything becomes political, and there are obviously a lot of issues at hand that start to stymie progress of legislation and how it can get passed. But it was circulated around 3 tax credits. One was refundable. And what we prioritized was the refundability of a tax credit for newsroom jobs. So the goal would be that it was a 5-year investment. It would end in 5 years. There was really very much a strong interest not to try to do something that was in perpetuity, something to help in the short term, but to be very clear and concise of when it would start and when it would end. The first year, it would help offset up to $25,000 of a journalist's role. Years 2 through 5, it would be $15,000 each year. Okay. Again, it doesn't pay for the entire position. It also creates an adverse incentive, it creates an incentive so that if people are having to reduce costs, they're not looking at the newsroom. And that was really important to me. The other 2 had to do with a tax credit for subscribers who subscribe to local news organizations. And then the second one was a tax credit for small businesses with less than 50 employees who advertise with local media. So that could be radio, it could be newspapers, it could be television, someone that had local news organization that was servicing the community itself.
So these go toward news organizations, supporting news organizations. Does that come back around to what you mentioned about professional journalism? You want to have an agency, an apparatus, an organization that's responsive to the community in place?
Yeah, so I think one of our biggest challenges as an industry and as a community that consumes information is that we become so accustomed to looking at our news feed through social media and thinking that information is valid, or perhaps not being skeptical of what components or what's driving that information. And I will say that I see more than ever agenda-driven journalism that is very concerning. I'm not entirely sure, how that's supposed to help bring us together and propel us into the future in a holistic way. And throughout this process, what I have seen around the quote-unquote professional journalism, why I use that term, is that lawmakers would look at me and they'd say, Francis, we want to help our local newspaper. But I struggle about this blogger who's calling themselves a journalist, and they have a beef with the school board because their kid didn't make the volleyball team. And they're not being fair. No one, they won't take anyone's calls. Right? There's no underlying infrastructure of understanding what qualifies as a journalist. And this has been a pretty difficult arena for me to address, because originally you would look at your local newspaper or you'd look at your local news video organization and you had trust, right? Those were your journalists. But today, there's nothing that stops people from calling themselves a journalist. They can go out and source a few quotes and they'll say, hey, I'm a journalist, right? And I believe that we need to really start to differentiate ourselves and saying what professional journalism is. And that is a key part of the work that I've been working on, that I want to continue to work on outside of just the advocacy efforts. Because I think that standardization, some level of standardization, is critical for what we're trying to achieve.
What do you think is the hope for legislation like this, say for the Community News and Small Business Support Act in Congress?
I would say, so the Community News and Small Business Support Act is the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, but we changed the name. I think there is hope. There's always hope, Jefferson. There's hope. There's a tax bill coming up next year. So we have been working and angling ourselves pretty hard on this. Just keynote, something I've learned since working in DC on these efforts, typically takes about 7 years to get something passed in legislative efforts, which is, I think, in itself quite telling. And I think that there's a chance. If there's a chance, it's clearly going to be around the tax credits, the refundable tax credits to support local reporters in newsrooms. There's a secondary piece of legislation that's out there that I think is quite interesting as well, and that is the Journalism Competition Preservation Act. And that is introduced by a trade organization known as the News Media Alliance. It really represents the big operations, the Dallas Morning News, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And they have taken a very strong approach to trying to require big tech to collectively bargain with publishers for payment and licensing of the content that they make billions of dollars off of. And we have seen legislation of similar sort get passed in Australia, France, the UK, Canada. In fact, that we have a publisher who has Canadian assets and now has some assets here in Washington State, who I understand it's been very supportive for them. So there is a responsibility. I mean, big tech has a responsibility here, and I want to be very clear. You know, we have a very, I would say, reasonable relationship with Google. They do a lot of work within the space to help try to support journalism. But I would also add that there is more to be done, and quite frankly, there needs to be some levers of incentive to require those organizations to come to the table and take some more accountability. And I would like to see it happen holistically outside of legislation or something like that. Yeah, there is another piece of legislation that's moving. It's just a very pared down version, kind of passed in California. And you're starting to get a lot of indications that different states are taking up different approaches on how to support local journalism. So that gives me a lot of hope as well.
Well, Francis, you've overseen a bit of expansion of Wick Communications as CEO during your time. You'll be ending your time as CEO later this year. What's next for you?
Thanks. Well, my full focus right now is Wick. And I will continue to work for Wick as a board member, as a family member, as an advocate of the company. At the end of the year will be nearly 9 years that I'll have been in the chair of CEO. I'm 43 years young, and it's time for me to put my hands towards some other things that are outside of the CEO chair. And I think that's really important, and I'm very excited about it. So the first thing I will do is I'll take some time to myself. That's the first thing I will do. I am working. There are some areas that I have interest in that I will continue to work in and work alongside. But I'm not 100%, prepared to say this is exactly what I'm going to do until that time's come, and I want to make sure that I'm fully focused on my transition out of this role for Wick.
Anything else you think we should know, Francis, about your company, your presence in Wenatchee, the NCWLIFE and Wenatchee World relationship?
I would say two things. It has been one of the biggest honors in my life to lead our family company and to work with the people that I do. And it is such a difficult business. And it's one that's not thanked enough. And for anyone that's out there in the Wenatchee Valley, if you have a moment and you see a reporter, whether from NCWLIFE or from the Wenatchee World, thank them. You don't have to agree with them, but thank them. Get to know them. These are your community members. These are your neighbors. And that's really important.
Francis Wick, CEO, Wick Communications. Grateful to you for being here.
Thanks.
You're watching the NCWLIFE channel.